Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's great. By the time everybody's done saying their names, I'm almost less nervous. The temple always looks so beautiful and loved after sesshin. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who sat sesshin and poured out your energy and effort into sustaining the life of the temple. So this morning is the first in a series of talks on a text by the founder of our tradition, Eihei Dogen, called the Bendo Wa, or a talk on the wholehearted practice of the way. And today I want to start with a brief introduction to that text, and then talk a little bit about how we can engage with Buddhist texts in general and with Dogen in particular in a way that's a little different than our conventional way of kind of consuming written information and using it towards our objectives, and how that different way of engaging can inform our practice. And we're not going to be studying the Bendo Wa together. You don't need to be reading it to participate in any of these talks. But if anybody is interested in reading it, there's a great book called The Wholehearted Way, which is a translation of the Bendo Wa and a commentary by Uchiyama Roshi. It's a book that's been really helpful to me, and I know to a lot of other people as well. There's a copy in the library. It's readily available. So if you're inspired, you can read it. So a little bit of background, just for people who aren't familiar. The founder of our tradition, Dogen, was a monk in 13th century Japan. And he eventually wasn't satisfied with the practice that he was finding. And he and his teacher, Zazen, went to China together to travel around and study. And while they were there, Zazen passed away, and Dogen met and studied with his other great teacher, Nyojo. And after training there for a while, he came back to Japan to share what he learned in China, both what he understood of the teachings that were being passed down there and the manner of practice that he encountered there. And obviously for us, a really big thing that he was bringing to Japan was the practice of Zazen. And he wrote the Bendo Wa in 1231, which was about 4 years after he got back to Japan. And what he tells us is that he was in a place where he didn't really have an established place where people could come and study with him. And he wanted to write down the core of what he had learned in a way that people could study who were seeking it. And so he's telling us that this is the teaching of the way. And I want to read a little bit of it. And I was kind of torn about where exactly in this talk to introduce it. And I just want to bring it in right at the very beginning so it can kind of rattle around during the rest of the talk. And for people who aren't familiar with reading Dogen, so you have kind of a sense of what that's like and what I'm talking about. So often in a text like this, and definitely in this one, the very beginning is kind of this is what I'm talking about in a really direct way. And then that's fleshed out and unfolded in the rest of the text. So this is just a couple of paragraphs from the first page. For disporting oneself freely in the samadhi, practicing Zazen in an upright posture is the true gate. Although this Dharma is abundantly inherent in each person, it is not manifest without practice. It is not attained without realization. When you let go, the Dharma fills your hands. It is not within the boundary of one or many. When you try to speak, it fills your mouth. It is not limited to vertical or horizontal. Buddhas continuously dwell in and maintain this Dharma. yet no trace of conceptualization remains. Living beings constantly function in and use this Dharma, yet it does not appear in their perception. The wholehearted practice of the way that I am talking about allows all things to exist in enlightenment and enables us to live out oneness in the path of emancipation. When we are breaking through the barrier and drop off all limitations, we are no longer concerned with conceptual distinctions. So, if you are not really familiar with this kind of writing, that can sound really opaque. And Dogen is kind of notoriously difficult, so if it sounds difficult, that's because it is. And it seems to be human nature to try and extract meaning out of things, to try and get at the essence of the information and pull it out so that we can use it to further our goals, right? So we can use it to get things done. That's definitely entrenched in American ideas of study and intellectual endeavor, to the extent that if we came up in that tradition, it's hard to see that there could possibly be other ways to engage, especially with information and to study. But it's not just an American thing. And in Buddhist cosmology, the human world is marked by greed and practicality. That is, to be human is to crave, to have desire, to want, to need, and to get busy getting what we want, right? To get down to the matter of getting what we need and taking care of it. And it's not fundamentally a problem, right? To be human is to be this way, not to be a broken human or a faulty human or a human that needs to become something different. It's part of what enables our day-to-day survival in the world. But it becomes the filter through which we see our whole lives. And that causes us suffering. So Buddhist texts in general resist this way of engaging with them. In different ways, depending on the text, but they all do in some way. If you are familiar with like the Lotus Sutra, does that with a lot of really fantastical imagery and the language of imagination. If you read the Diamond Sutra and other Prajna Paramita texts, it does it through constant negation, right? Not this, not this, not this. Because it's not this, it is this, right? And in the Zen tradition, we do that a lot with poetry. And I want to focus on two ways that, two reasons for this, right? One is that the truth that these texts are sharing with us can't be talked about any other way, right? That the authors of these texts are not being intentionally slippery. They're speaking about the Dharma, about awakening, in a clear and direct way. They're just speaking about something that can't be contained in language completely. Okay? And the other is that the way that these teachings are expressed invites us into a different kind of inquiry, a kind of inquiry that doesn't try to kill the question. Right? Instead of trying to just extract meaning so that we have some kind of explanation and understanding, it teaches us or invites us to learn to be in an intimate relationship with that inquiry, with this kind of open curiosity for a truth that is unfolding in an alive way, right? It's unfolding as our lives. So when we're engaging with texts, we can learn to cultivate that kind of different relationship. And Hojo-san has talked to us a lot about different ways to engage with texts. It's great to just read them and struggle with the language and have questions then come up. It's also great to do things like chant it or pick part of it and chant it. So just let it come through your body. To pick it up and open to a paragraph at random and just read it and then put it down and try not to think too much about what it means. We can copy them out to let it come through our hands. Maybe engage in some kind of art project, whatever speaks to you, to express it in a different way. Basically, learning to let these texts kind of land in us in a different way and inspire new and interesting questions. And it's the nature of them that we pick it up and study it for a while, we come away with a certain kind of understanding. And if we come back in a year or two and pick it up again, it will feel totally different, right? I'm always, every time I come back to this particular text, I'm just like, that was not in there last time. I swear. I mean, I've read it so many times and it's different every time, right? So when we come to talking about Dogen in particular, one of his core teachings, one of the biggest gifts that he gave to us is the idea of practice enlightenment, right? That practice and awakening are not separate. That we don't practice to attain enlightenment or realization. That from the first time that we sit down in Zazen or engage with a teacher and walk into a temple and bow, we are practicing realization. We are practicing Buddha. And there isn't ever a time when that practice is done. Because awakening isn't static. It's unfolding as the whole world. And so we are always practicing to unfold it from moment to moment. And in the same way that we try to extract meaning and information when we're reading things in a kind of consumptive way, as we move in the world, we're constantly flattening it out. We're constantly separating ourselves into self and other, subject and object, turning beings into things, and manipulating the world in service of our goals. And that, it sounds kind of harsh when you say it like that, but it is what we are doing all the time. And again, it's not just a problem. It's how we survive in the world, right? I don't need to have an intimate relationship with a bus that's coming down the road at me, right? I need to go, bus, danger, get out of the way, right? As a living being in the world, I need to be able to go, this is a glass of water and I can drink it, right? I need to know what it is and be able to use it. But in this way that we are constantly selfing and othering and subject and objecting, we create this deep sense that we are separate. And that causes us great suffering, right? It flattens out our world into a collection of objects that we think we know what they are. And it cuts off our ability to intimately meet the actuality of our lives, including the things and the people that are closest to us. Sometimes especially the people that are closest to us, right? And we do it with the best of intentions. Like, if I'm trying to create a life for my family, right? I think I have this idea of who my children and my partners and my friends are, and I have this vision of what it is to create a good life for them, and I'm throwing myself into it. I get busy on that goal of creating a good life. And I stop seeing the amazing wholeness of the people that are in it, right? I can't meet who they actually are unfolding moment to moment because I have this idea of who I think they are and how I'm supposed to be taking care of them. And I mean, that's just one example, but we do it all the time with everything. And for me, the biggest loss there is that I'm so clamped down on who I think the people around me are and how I think things are supposed to be unfolding and what my path is, that their vibrancy, their change, the way that our relationship is rising and falling and changing all the time becomes a source of pain instead of a source of wonder. So this is also how we approach the practice of Zazen. Right? We flatten it out into a method. We tend to have some goal we're trying to accomplish, right? Whether that's I'm practicing because I want to be calmer, I want to be happier, I want to be enlightened, I want to be a Buddha, I want to be the kind of cool person who gets it and doesn't have a goal, right? There's always something, and that we slip into that. And that's, again, not a surprise and not always a problem. I mean, the Four Noble Truths are there is suffering, there is a cause of suffering, right? Greed, hate, and delusion are the cause of suffering. There is a cessation of suffering, and there is a path to the cessation of suffering, right? I am suffering. I want to get to not suffering. I want a way to get there. Right? That's not a surprise. That's why, that's what I'm drawn to, right? But Dogen is telling us that this path doesn't go from here to there in our conventional understanding, right? Because there isn't actually separate from here. And so he's showing us in his writing a kind of different way to act and to practice in the way. So I want to read a little bit of this again and encourage you to listen for the clues you hear in it, about how this practice enlightenment acts in the world. How does it show up in the world? For disporting oneself freely in this samadhi, practicing Zazen in an upright posture is the true gate. Although this Dharma is abundantly inherent in each person, it is not manifested without practice, it is not attained without realization. When you let go, the Dharma fills your hands. It is not within the boundary of one or many. When you try to speak, it fills your mouth. It is not limited to vertical or horizontal. Buddhas continuously dwell in and maintain this Dharma, yet no trace of conceptualization remains. Living beings constantly function in and use this Dharma, yet it does not appear in their perception. The wholehearted practice of the way that I am talking about allows all things to exist in enlightenment and enables us to live out oneness in the path of emancipation. When we break through the barrier and drop off all limitations, we are no longer concerned with conceptual distinctions. So it could pick anything in there. But I just want to throw out some of the things that jump out at me and the questions that they turn around in me. So for disporting oneself freely in this samadhi, practicing Zazen in an upright posture is the true gate. So sitting Zazen is the true gate. That's pretty direct, right? He's definitely telling us to sit Zazen. But what does it mean to disport oneself freely in this Zazen, right? And what I hear in there is that Zazen is not a method to achieve a goal, right? That it is more a terrain to be explored, right? It's not about getting from here to there. It's about exploring this vast realm that we are never going to completely know all the details of. We're never completely going to be like, oh yeah, I know what that is, I got it, right? And at the same time, it's not just, oh well, it doesn't matter, sit down and just go to sleep. You're doing it, it doesn't matter, right? That we should throw ourselves into exploring this, but that it's something we do with freedom, that can be done with ease and joy, right? When you let go, the Dharma fills your hands. It is not within the boundary of the one or the many. When you try to speak, it fills your mouth. It is not limited to vertical or horizontal. So what is it to let go and let the Dharma fill my hands? You know, what is it to be able to receive the truth that is coming as my life right now, right? I have this longing. I don't know about you. I think you probably do, or you wouldn't be here, but I have this longing to fill some kind of need to understand what it is to live a good human life, right? So what is it like to open up and receive that wisdom as it's coming to me now, and not think that there's some other time, other place, other situation where it would all make sense and all be perfect. How is it that the Dharma fills our mouths when we speak? It doesn't seem like it, right? How is it that this Dharma that I think I'm looking for, or that I am looking for and think I can't find, this truth of life, how is it that that is actually what is unfolding through us all the time? The wholehearted practice of the way that I am talking about allows all things to exist in enlightenment and enables us to live out oneness in the path of emancipation. Like, what is the nature of this practice that it allows all things to exist in enlightenment? Is my practice like that? Right? That's a question for me on a day-to-day basis, from moment to moment. Is my practice actually like that? Oh, I don't know, right? How could it be different? And my current favorite right now is Buddhas continuously dwell in and maintain this Dharma, yet no trace of conceptualization remains. Living beings constantly function in and use this Dharma, yet it does not appear in their perception. What is the difference between dwell in and maintain and function in and use? How is it different? How does it feel different to me to talk about dwelling in and maintaining my home, for example, than functioning in and using it? How is it different to dwell in and maintain this world than functioning in and using it? Or in my relationships, in my job, in this tradition? How is it different to dwell in and maintain these teachings than to function in and use them? And how would that change my life? And one thing that points out to me is that the way that I am in the world, the way that we act in the world, is the verification of what we actually understand and the questions that we're actually asking. We're pretty good at having a surface intellectual understanding of things that doesn't actually go deep and change how we are in the world. But that's a little bit of a lie that we're telling ourselves, right? The way that we unfold our life and the way that we meet each other is the way by which we know what it is we actually believe at a deep level, what we actually understand and know about the world. They're not separate. So whatever questions arise for you when you read this or any other text, those are some of the ones that pop up for me just in the first 2 paragraphs, right? Or second and third paragraphs, actually. I skipped the first one. But whatever it is that arises for you, my encouragement is to let them rattle around in your life. Don't be in a hurry to answer them with your intellect. And as answers arise, try them on and let them change your life. See how they work. And resist the urge to get stuck on any one thing as the answer. And engaging with teachers will help with that. Whether that's reading texts, going to Zazen, coming and listening to talks. That teachers will constantly ask you to turn what you know on its head and to go a step beyond what it is we already think. Not because we're always falling short, but because there's always somewhere else to go. There's always a next meeting. And I just want to end with the wisdom we are waking up to is made up of everything. Not just everything, but everything. Nothing is outside of it. It unfolds as the life of each and everything, including us. Right? And how could that ever be completely explained or comprehended? And Zazen is also like this. Our practice is also like this. We'll never completely master it, and we'll never completely get it because it doesn't sit still and it doesn't have edges. But that's actually the good news, right? That's the exciting thing. That's the invitation to a lifetime of a kind of open, curious, intimate relationship with it, right? It's the difference between having a skill and having an explanation for something and falling in love with something, right? And we can let that intimate meeting transform our lives in a way that, I don't know, for me makes it worth it. Right? So, thank you. And we have time for questions, comments, rebuttals.
Jikie. Thank you so much. When you were talking toward the end of the relationship between Buddhas maintaining, and I can't remember the other verb, dwelling and maintaining, and humans using and functioning, I was thinking about what you said at the very beginning about how beautiful it is to be in the temple and to feel how the temple has been held through sesshin. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if you can say a little bit more about what that relation, maybe not with the temple, but what the relationship is between this sort of dwelling and this using. Mm.
It's hard for me to know what to say about it. It's something that I feel into really strongly. But I mean, it's really obvious to anybody who's paying attention, right, that we live in a culture and a time that is just far beyond insane with the way that we treat things like trash and treat people like
Worse than trash,
right? That we don't treat anyone or anything as if it is alive and of value and has every bit as much right to exist and be here as anything else. And that's just a fundamental mistake in the nature of how reality actually is. And any way we can turn our attention a little bit into recognizing in a deep way the intrinsic value and aliveness of everything, and not just in a biologically alive sense, right? This temple is alive and has a life. The groups, organizations, families, relationships, and everything that we're engaged in is alive and has a life. And when we actually practice not just thinking that, but letting it change our life in the way that we actually deal with our world, then something can really transform there. And we practice it really directly in the temple, in the way that we touch things, in the way that we hold things, in the way that we hold form. We talked about that a lot in our forms class in the last month, if you were there, right? In the way that we tend to the garden or to our task with care, whatever that simple little task is. And that ripples out and affects how we meet strangers, how we buy stuff at the grocery store, how easily we just throw away food because we don't feel like eating it, right? Or use something up and get rid of it. And I think that there's kind of infinite depth there if we throw ourselves into it.
There's one very simple phrase that you use really struck deeply with me, and that is meeting change with wonder instead of awe, especially with regards to the ones that we love. So I just want to thank you for that.
It's really easy for us to focus on the impermanence of everything in our world in a negative way, right? The things that we want to stay the same, and how much it can break our heart when they change, right? And the big obvious one is when, people die, relationships end, right? But it's also what brings life joy, right? It's why things are so precious. Something like, whether it's cherry blossoms or new babies or falling in love, right? Why is that so precious? Because it's fleeting, right? Because it's alive and always changing. And it's what also gives rise to the next most beautiful thing. And we love the people in our lives because they're these wonderful, unknowable sources of joy. And when we become fixated on the, unintentionally with the best of intentions, we get fixated on the role that they fill in our life, then we lose the ability to appreciate them for what they are.
I'm wondering if you could give some more insight as to how to approach texts that are confusing to you.
Ask questions. Okay? You can always go to Zazen with Hojo-san or to practice discussions with questions. Just try to have real specific questions. Like Hojo-san always says, don't come with, I think Dogen said something about something, right? Be able to actually quote it and say, what does this mean? But the other thing is to just let the parts that confound you just kind of rattle around and get more clear with yourself, not about what the answer is, but what your question is. What is it about that niggles at me, right? And to just, when we read texts a lot or we chant them so that they're just in our brain, so you could get a song stuck in your head. If you're reading a text a lot, it kind of gets stuck in your head, and as you go through life, it will pop up. And it is amazing how often you're just doing something in your life and it pops up and you go, oh, this is a way that it applies to my life. And I think the important thing there is that it's the things that arise are a way that it applies to our life. It's not like the meaning of the text. And so we don't have to have any angst about whether we're interpreting it correctly, right? We're interpreting it in a way that's alive in our life, and it will continue to be refined and changed. And that's actually pretty freeing when we get comfortable with it.
Thank you.
Yes.
So with Dogen, is emptiness a form of nirvana?
So one of the ways that we can talk about emptiness, when we talk about emptiness in Zen, what we tend to be talking about is the Prajna Paramita teachings, right? This great wisdom. And when we're talking about emptiness, we're kind of talking about this wholeness of everything, right? We are empty of self-nature, but not a kind of emptiness that is nihilistic, right? It's not the absence of existence. And I think that the most that I want to say about that in relationship to nirvana, which is the end of suffering, right? Which is complete and perfect enlightenment, is that Dogen tells us really clearly that nirvana isn't separate from this life, right? That nirvana isn't separate from this existence. And this existence isn't separate from emptiness, right? That form itself is emptiness, and emptiness is itself form. They're completely contained within each other, within themselves. And nirvana isn't separate from that either. Personally, being a living being who's functioning in this world, I can't tell you a whole lot about exactly what nirvana is. I can talk more about what it's not in a way that, we can kind of step backwards into it. But I wouldn't want to try to explain what it is. Hope that was in some way on topic. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming out and being here for me talking. I'm acutely aware that I'm not Hojo-san on your Sunday morning, so I really appreciate everybody being here and participating with me. So thank you.